Hey, Sarah.
Yes, Alex?
How much do you like your partners to disclose to you about their other relationships?
That's none of your fucking business.
Well, excuse me. I guess that answers my question.
Welcome to Mistakes Were Made, a podcast about non-monogamy for messy people like us. I'm Sarah. I'm a queer, non-monogamous therapist, parent, and writer.
And I'm her husband, Alex. I'm on leave from work right now, so I'm just, a human floating in the ether, living. Isn't that enough for you, Sarah?
Just sort of staring out the window for hours on end.
Just being, just feeling just my humanity, just existing. Or also like I'm like your house husband, kind of.
Or also going on lots of dates and being freed up to gather some more material for the podcast.
Yeah.
Day dates.
And I'm Jessica here producing, resident monogamist, but I think everyone I know is polyamorous, so I basically don't have to disclose anything about my relationships, but I get to hear about everybody else's.
Oh, that's a good deal.
If you're monogamous, you don't have to disclose anything about your relationships?
Well, to my partner.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I
don't have any system.
Other. Yeah,
it's happening and being disclosed. It's happening and being disclosed.
It's the perfect. It's like a Rube Goldberg. Yes. It's a perpetual motion machine.
It's a perpetual
monogamy. Perfect. Well, today we're talking about disclosure, not the 1994 Michael Crichton novel about reverse sexual harassment.
I cannot believe how often you are able to bring that up in conversation. That book.
Specifically that Michael Crichton
Every
book?
time I think of the word disclosure, I think of, what's his name? Michael Douglas in the trailer being like, she harassed me.
She harassed me.
And then he's like, sexual harassment is about power. When did I have the power?
You have no idea what you're up against, as usual.
We'll see.
I don't know why I have the trailer
Michael
to this memorized. But yeah, I'm a real Michael Douglas over here. Right?
Yes, I feel like half of your just worldview was developed
by Michael
Crichton between the years of like 1991 and 1994.
Yeah. I was so concerned about whether I could read those books that I never stopped to wonder if I should. Anyway, not that kind of. So the fans will get that one. Crichton heads. Crichtomies. I don't know what that's called. Okay, never mind. Anyway.
Make him stop, please.
Right. I have a cold today, and I just took a lot of cold medicine, which is, for me, it just feels like I did a bunch of coke somehow. Like, it's cold medicine, over-the-counter cold medicine is powerful stuff.
It is. For a delicate system like yours, it really is.
We're going to go on a real wild ride. Today, unfortunately, reverse sexual harassment is not going to get unpacked again.
Yet again.
Continue to be ignored.
Season 5.
Yeah, maybe season 5. But we should really do an episode about disclosure. I need to start a side podcast that is just about 80s movies, like misogynist 80s movies.
Yes, where in fact it's the woman.
Fatal Attraction. There are so many, and it's always Michael Douglas is always the man.
Oh yeah, it's true. You know how we will have themes for the movies that we're going to watch during the long dark?
Yeah.
I feel like this is it.
Yeah,
Michael Douglas.
Yeah, we need a name though. The Michael
Dugout.
The Michael Dugout. Yeah.
The Michael Dugout.
Very good.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, no, disclosure is not the book. Not that kind. We're talking about how much you should tell your partners about your other relationships, right? Like what you should share, and how to decide that, and mistakes that we have made around that kind of disclosure. Right? What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think that this is like such an important episode. It's interesting to me that we've made it to season 4 and not talked about this issue, which I think is like really kind of central to.
Yeah, we've talked about hiding things and lying.
Right.
But we haven't talked about and then from a more affirmative stance, like disclosure.
So this is just like a mature reframe.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. From a human perspective. Do you think that this is just like, is like, are there hard and fast rules about how much you should disclose in poly relationships between partners? Or is it like a personal preference thing, or like, what's the high level?
My experience as a therapist is that people really are kind of all over the map on this, that what people want or look for, or what makes them feel comfortable. So I think that there is a lot of preference involved. But it's like tricky and pretty nuanced, because I think you do get quickly into this territory of like, when is someone hiding something versus respecting like autonomy and privacy? Or when is someone over disclosing because they themselves are uncomfortable with something that they've experienced or has happened in their relationships, and they like need other partners to help them hold that. So I think it's like it's probably dynamic in the sense that you're always
right.
Navigating.
Right.
Those
and then
holes.
if it is personal preference, then, there's more than one party in the relationship. So those two partners' preferences could be different. And so you have to find like a middle ground. So hopefully we can explore all of that today. But
I think we'll find the perfect middle ground.
We always do.
We always do.
The final answer.
Yes. Yep. Well, we had a busy weekend. It's Monday morning, and I was...
Is it ever?
You were... Yeah, God. I was out on... You were out on Friday on a date. I was out on Saturday on a date, and then you were out last night on a date. And we haven't really had a chance to catch up since any of those. So I thought maybe we could just disclose things in real time.
Okay. So this is like us debriefing about...
Yeah. It seemed like a good idea when I was putting the script together.
Like,
now
why?
I'm thinking it's a terrible idea.
Why did you decide on this gimmick?
I don't know. You gotta have a gimmick.
Yeah.
People want a gimmick, Sarah.
Okay. Ask away.
Ask Michael Douglas. So yeah, how was your date last night?
It was good. I did not sleep very well because I had insomnia. And I'm like, as loyal listeners of this podcast will know, I'm a little sensey baby about sleepover and have been my entire life. And so like the thing that I was most afraid of happening at sleepover, if you will, happened, where I just like got in an anxiety spiral and then stayed there for hours.
And your partner was asleep?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I was just like, I'll just find like a really disturbing book to read. That'll help.
Great.
So there's that. Also, he made food, which was great. And I brought some of that to you all this morning.
You made pie.
Pie.
We approve.
And
What'd you
it
all
was
do?
pretty good. Ate, sat around, talked.
Okay.
I wish
Skip a big chunk.
the listeners
I had insomnia.
could see the look on Sarah's face.
The one eyebrow raised in the middle there. The yada 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 section. Cool.
Walked from one room to the other. I went to the bathroom a couple of times.
So you didn't leave the apartment the entire time?
No.
Okay, interesting.
No, we didn't. How was your date on Saturday?
Similar. We went out and picked up takeout Chinese food. So did leave the house.
From where?
This place by Othello Station, I can't remember what it's called. It was really cute. The people who gave the food to me were really nice, and they showed me a shortcut to get back to the parking garage.
What'd you get?
Mongolian beef and what was the cashew chicken.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting choices.
Yeah.
Huh.
If I had said mushu pork, would you have been mad?
Only if the pancakes were right.
Yeah, I knew they wouldn't be, so I didn't
They never are.
get them. Yeah. And we watched that movie Jennifer's Body, starring Megan Fox.
I like have the vaguest memory
It's
of
like
this
a
movie
cult
existing.
movie from 2009, and I feel like it's in a sort of... It's like... I think it was a really famous movie in the time, but we were kind of checked out during that time or whatever. It has some... I don't know. Like, I guess we didn't do a post-analysis. Don't be jealous. We didn't do a biting cultural critique of the movie and discuss how it
Why not? What did you do instead?
got the Chinese food.
Oh,
I think.
really?
Yeah.
What a weird timeline you're
Yeah.
laying out for me.
Yeah, it is. Might be a little confused. Anyway, yeah, it was fun. I slept pretty well. And then I had to figure out how to make coffee in the morning on somebody else's coffee setup, and I did it wrong. It was like a pour over thing, but I forgot to put like the filter holder in, so I just made the coffee and then just poured it right in, and the filter just disintegrated. Like, blah. Then I couldn't find the garbage, so I was like, what do I do with it? It was hilarious. And then I just had to go outside and throw it away in the big garbage because I didn't know where the regular garbage is. And that's what happened.
So that's you also.
And then I came back to took care of my children.
Yes, and you
last
did an
night.
excellent job with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jessica, what do you notice about
Interesting. I
Alex
mean,
and my debrief?
That was like pretty. I mean, we're being a little goofy, but that was kind of a typical debrief right there.
I usually would have gone further into this whole coffee making thing and maybe some more details about the food.
but no big details about the sex.
Yeah, definitely not.
Skipped over here.
Yeah.
How do you decide when and how and if to talk about sex with other people?
I think we usually don't talk about it. Definitely not in detail
I think we don't talk about it
at all.
at all.
Yeah.
Like, let's not be coy. like just
zero.
say it straight.
Yeah.
Well, you and I don't talk about it at all. Like after, it maybe kind of depends if it's an experience that's more just like a sex-based experience. You know,
Right.
we'll
like
talk
a sex party.
for example, or like a group sex, or I remember when I went out and had that threesome,
Oh, yeah.
I told you the details
Right,
of that.
right,
you know,
right,
so
right.
if it's something that like doesn't have an emotional component to it, I feel like we do.
Right.
And we might in like very broad ways reference like sexual dynamics with other people,
yeah.
but not in any kind of detailed way at all.
Yeah. And I think once it's assumed that you're having sex, then we don't probably talk about it.
I mean, is that something that you all like know about each other's partners, like whether or not you've started having sex with a new
I
partner?
figure that I know the precise date that Sarah has had sex with a new partner.
Oh, really? How do you know?
You figure that
because
you
it's
know
the
that?
seventh date.
Yeah, I can just tell. Maybe because of the way that she describes the date and there being like a whole chunk of the timeline missing. Maybe that's how I know. But just because I know your like vibe and progression. Usually I think I know like beforehand. Like, this is probably the... And like, I know like what you're doing, you know, like whether you're like engineering it to have a place to have sex and stuff like that.
Yeah. My vibe. So you know my vibe.
And I can see into your soul.
Wow.
My vibey soul.
Yeah.
What about you, Sarah?
We used to talk about when we started having sex with people earlier on. And then at some point that just sort of fell away and became less important. I think I used to want you to tell me. I'm like sort of scrolling back in time. And I realized like when you would go out with new people, I wanted you to tell me if you all had sex.
Right.
And
That's true.
Now I'm like, that's fine. I don't need to know that.
What do you think changed?
Probably like you were saying, there's a little bit of just getting to know each other and being like, well, I sort of know how Alex progresses through relationships and, you know, the way he talks about things. And so I don't feel like I need to know because I'm like in the dark about something. I'm like, yeah, I know what's going on and that's fine. But also I think for me with you having like really potentially like detailed or graphic thoughts about the sexual experience you're having with people is something that I have come to understand I don't want.
Okay. You wouldn't like the film Jennifer's Body if you don't like graphic sexual depictions of people having sex and then dismembering each other.
Oh, I didn't say I didn't want that.
Okay, cool. Then you should see
Obviously
that
I
movie
want.
then. Yeah.
Obviously that sounds
Yeah.
great.
So, on the note.
But it is interesting because you and I have had like group sex together. So I do have like images of you having sex with other people. It's not like that is a total black box for me, but I do think the emotional component, it's like the combination of there being an emotional element and also like sexual details, I think is maybe more information than I want.
Huh. Yeah. Could it also be that you having, you know, like the change from you wanting that information to not kind of lines up with the first time that we had group sex together, the first time that you saw me having sex with somebody else. So I wonder if there's an element of that there as well, that like it's less of a
I'm like, I just have that one
mystery.
picture and I'm just going to apply it to every situation. I'm sure that's what's happening.
And in every picture you're sitting in the corner like looking contemplatively.
Okay, so no details about sex. What?
I just feel so embarrassed about all of this.
It's fucking embarrassing. I told you,
it is.
you were like, let's do one about disclosures. I was like, what?
You always make it sound like it's my idea.
It's 100%. Everything
Okay.
is your idea.
I just wanted to
100%.
make the Michael Crichton joke. We could have just done that. Well, I think like this is not about us hiding things, right? It's about like, I think it's about like being gentle and caring with each other.
Yes.
That's my, like the way that I think about it usually is like the reason that I wouldn't, maybe at times in the past, I would be like shy about telling you things because I'd feel like, actually shy or embarrassed or ashamed. And I think now it's a lot more like, I know that you don't want that explicit information. So I'm, not going to give it to you unless you ask for it.
Right. What about for you though? What are your feelings about it?
I also don't want it. I was thinking about this the other day. I think what I want the information when it's not going to make me feel jealous. Like if you had like really bad sex with somebody,
You're like, give me every
then I'm
single
like,
detail.
tell me about
every
that.
single one.
Yeah.
I gotta know.
Or if you didn't, then, I want that information. But then if you did, then I don't want it. But then now that I've admitted that to you,
That system no longer works.
that system no longer works. So it's totally
Retire that system.
yeah. So don't do that. Forget I said that. It's like there are things that I don't want to know.
Would you say that similarly for me, to me, there's like a difference between there being an emotional component versus just like a going out and having sex with people scenario, or
No,
doesn't matter? Both.
I don't think.
Both
I
would
think
bother you.
both in different ways, maybe. I think relationships where you have more of emotional connection to the person, especially if I've met them, feel safer, and I would be less worried about that than if it was more casual or random. And I think that's a thing that I've kind of been trying to like understand for myself on a broader level for a while now, like this like fear of women's uncontrolled sexuality. That is like the trigger.
And it's triggered by the idea of your partners having sex with strangers,
Yes.
more so than being in like emotional
Caring relationships. Yeah. It's like a patriarchal pseudo caring thing or pseudo protective kind of thing, which again, this is not me like endorsing this. It's just like a internalized thing.
Yeah. Well, we're all fucked by the patriarchy.
Yeah.
You're not alone. It's interesting. I mean, this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but because you brought it up, now I'm thinking about it. I think for me, because like casual sex is more available, I perceive it as being more available to people other than me. Like I imagine people having more casual sex than I do or kind of can.
That's funny.
Why is that funny?
I think everybody imagines that. I don't know if there's been
Right.
surveys about this, but everybody thinks
Everybody's
other
kind of
people are having
imagining
more
that.
sex than they are.
And so then I sort of imagine that there's like a type of sex that people are having that I have not experienced. And it's like one where there's like no emotional elements. And there's one where there's not the same kind of like complexity and even like fear that I experience when I have like more casual sex. And so it's like a weird projection where I kind of want to hear people talk about that because I'm like, oh, this is like a thing I feel like I can't access. And then I kind of don't want to hear people talk about it because it's a way that I feel like I'm kind of messed up.
Are you talking about wanting to hear about it from your friends or from your partners?
Partners.
Okay.
Partners.
What about from friends? You would want to hear about it more probably from friends, right?
Yeah, completely different. Totally different.
Oh.
Yeah. Also because I think with friends, there's less of a curating the telling. You know, like a friend will just be so gnarly about the details of it in a way that makes it feel very real and like less cinematic. It's just like, here's the sort of like crusty, awkward, occasionally like incredible, but also like near miss experience of some, you know, weird, wild sex I had. I find that reassuring because that makes it all seem more human and like relatable, I guess.
Yeah, interesting. I feel like there's like a cliche about like the way that men talk about sex and like locker room talk and stuff, but like women are probably actually having more explicit, nasty conversations about sex with each other than men.
Probably.
Well, in part because most of the women I know are not talking to me about, most of the women I know are not talking to me about sex with men.
Right.
Because most of the women I know are having more queer sex. But if they are talking about having sex with men, they are not talking to me about how they're like, it was this soaringly amazing experience and I saw God. And let me tell you, I fucked this guy like you wouldn't believe. I mean, maybe there's like one person, maybe two people that would do that. And you both know who I'm talking about.
Sure do.
Some people do say that.
You know, but for the most part,
I've never had a man say anything like that to me ever, which I think, I don't know. It's certainly a not all men situation. I'm sure a lot of men are talking about that stuff, but I don't feel like I've had a man give me details about sex like at all.
Really?
Really?
I can't think of any times. No.
I mean, that doesn't really surprise me.
Like
but
beyond like, we slept together. Yeah. No.
We slept together. It was hot.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I'm probably doing that more than anybody else.
Right.
And all my guy friends are like,
Please.
no thanks.
Gross.
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there we've generated a lot of material about the sex piece of this that I imagine will come into play as we move through the episode. But there's another way that you and I are talking about our dates from the past weekend that is, it's like a polite minimizing of the experience that we had.
Right. It was just a tiny little date.
I'm like, let me open with what went wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
I had insomnia.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was saying about like it's polite is a good word for it.
And yeah, and you guys both, I mean, you both basically kind of listed off a number of activities, but you didn't share anything about like what it felt like or what you found like super funny or interesting or like the moment when you looked into your partner's eyes and thought like, wow, this is whatever.
It's great storytelling, isn't it? Like first we did this, then we did this, then we did this.
Like, you would think we weren't professional
Which
storytellers.
is like, yeah, so different than the way you would tell most
Zero dramatic art.
Yeah.
Just moving through time with weird gaps in the timeline.
Yeah. And that's how it's going to stay.
Interesting.
Well, what do you make of that, Alex? I mean, that's like a culture that we've developed with each other over the course of 4.5 years. And so I don't want to give people the sense that this has been unexamined between the two of us.
No.
It's like through a fair amount of trial and error. I think we've landed on this being like the culture, the protocol.
The thing that's best for us. Yeah,
that's best for us.
know that there are other people are different. Like I feel like I've been in relationships with people where they had another partner, maybe a primary partner where, I mean, in some cases they don't tell each other anything, like even kind of like when they're on dates or who they're on dates with, names of people, any description, like kind of obscuring as much information as possible. And then there are people who are really like, I feel like this is a little bit more of a newbie thing, but people who are trying to like really share a lot and are kind of like, we're like on a team.
Right.
And so when you go out on a date, You're going to tell me everything
Right.
about it
It's
and
like
like
team
check
slut
in
is the way I
during
sort of
team,
think
yeah,
this.
team slut. Exactly. And like somebody on team slut got fucked. So 1 point for team slut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I don't know if that works or not. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem like it would be right for me.
Why not?
Well, I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, it seems kind of hot. Maybe the framing has just been wrong. No, I think because I guess they would have to be, it would have to be like more explicitly, specifically sexual,
Yeah.
which I guess is the kind of the opposite of what
What you just said.
Yeah. So I don't know. And also if we're in the situation together, then like obviously I'm getting like a lot of the information because I'm like there experiencing it with you and I'm into you being slutty in that context. So I don't know. What does it all mean? I'm all over the place.
Yeah, so am I. I
Yeah.
mean, that's like, as the more that we're talking about it, I'm like, I know what you and I do. And
Right.
then the second that we look it in the eye, I'm like, I don't know
And
why
why?
that is what we do.
Yeah.
Because it's not actually totally consistent internally between the two of us and with our other relationships.
Is that bad? Is that just the
I don't
same
know.
thing as like people, cheating on each other for years and years and having everybody know on some level that that's happening, but not? Are we just like our parents?
Okay.
Well,
Cut.
time out.
Sorry.
Yeah, that cold medicine is fucking
Answer
you
the
up.
goddamn question.
What do you think, Jess?
Well, I mean, I think the question that's coming up for me is like we've been talking about sort of how you report back to each other after a date, and the stories that you tell that way. But like in other parts of life or later on at other times, I mean, are you telling each other stories about stuff that you did with other partners or like conversations that you had with other partners? Like, I'm wondering if some of these disclosures maybe come at other times where it's not just sort of the like report back of here's what we
Yes.
did, right?
I think that is a good point, and it's also like drawing out that how much of it is about the sex part specifically. Like it would be ridiculous for you to not disclose like a movie that you watched with another partner, but that is something that could make me jealous. Or like if you told me about a really interesting conversation that you had with them, that is also something that could make me jealous. So it's kind of interesting that like and that's not stuff that we really edit, I don't think.
No, not
Do you think
really.
so?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, to your point, Jessica, Alex and I will have, when we have like the time and space, I think a certain amount of this also speaks to just the stage of life that we're in and the reality of our daily lives, which is, a weekend like this where we've engineered all of this to be able to happen and kind of like balance on the head of a pin. And then like we're reconnecting on Monday morning and we're going to make a podcast. And then there's going to be like 2 hours where we got to catch up on work. And then we're going to pick up 3 kids. And, there's not like a lot of time for unpacking the emotional depth or the sexual dynamics of an experience. And so I think like in these moments, we have this kind of protocol, but like when it's Saturday or Sunday morning and we're drinking coffee in bed for like an hour and a half, we'll circle back to some of this stuff and talk about like feelings that we're having in a broader sense, or themes that exist in the relationships in a bigger sense, or things that are bothering us, or that we want advice about.
Yes. Really good point. So there's the like immediate kind of like recap, catching up, reconnecting kind of conversation. And then there's the like rest of it. I agree. There's like, very little is like obscured in the rest of it. And I think that's also where we get the vibes of like what's going on, with the like escalation of the relationship or like, are you having sex or
The bigger picture.
Any of that bigger picture stuff. It's like, we're going to get that from each other in that context.
And I think this will help like segue into some of these like bigger themes outside of just the navel gazing that we're doing here, which hopefully is useful or interesting to people.
We have fascinating navels.
Yeah, your navels are cute.
Which is over 4.5 years, we've built a lot of trust with each other, and that I trust you to be able to kind of like experience and process the events in your dates or relationships and come to me with like the things that we need or want to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think earlier on, I didn't trust you in that way. And so there was more of a wanting every single piece of information because I was like kind of vigilant. And I wanted to know like what is happening, what might be around every corner. Now I just, it would be a distraction, I feel like, for me to hear some like raw detail, unprocessed from you. When I know that you're going to come to me and talk to me about the things that you and I need and want to talk about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I remember when kind of earlier on in our marriage being open, you would often want me to like text you, or we'd kind of both do this, like text each other on the way home from a date to like let each other know that we were coming home and like how it went in some broad terms, or maybe like whether we had, I feel like at a certain point,
it was like, whether we had sex. Yeah. It's so funny to think about that now, how I was like, couldn't conceive of the idea that you would like come home and I wouldn't know if you had sex with another person. And now I feel zero anxiety.
Well, and we would like get into fights about it, like when we first reconnected after dates.
Yeah. We would. Yeah.
So yeah, that trust is fucking hard earned.
It is.
I don't want to make it sound like we just slowly built trust.
No. Or like we've papered over something
fucking
here.
Gnarly.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And we were like excavating some shit on the regular.
Because, and don't you think that's just because, like, partly because you know, the first time your partner who you're like really attached to sleeps with somebody else, or even the 5th or 10th or 50th time, it's kind of like
but who's counting?
It could mean a lot. And then once you get up to 2,565, it's like no big deal. I am counting. No.
It's interesting. Okay, so taking a moment and like zooming out a bit, I feel like one of the things we concluded here is that through a lot of trial and error and trust building and mistakes, which we'll get into, you and I have figured out like what is the best protocol for us coming together immediately after being with others, which is no details about sex and polite minimizing. And to trust each other to, when there's more time and space, talk about bigger themes or feelings or concerns that we want to share with each other, and that we trust each other to bring the right stuff to each other. And
just like how we feel about the relationship in general, which I want to point out because it does that. When we were just kind of talking about the initial conversation, it was making me feel like worried that about like kind of disloyalty to those other people.
Right.
And I don't think that we're being disloyal to those other people. We maybe are like not being super explicit or like minimizing in the immediate reaction. But in the longer term, I do think we share pretty like honest reflections on like the relationships, how they're going, what we like about the people, all sorts of stuff like that.
Yes, I think so too.
True. Yeah.
So thinking about this question of this is what works for us, but that doesn't mean that that's what works for everyone. And I think the like feeling through why this is difficult or challenging or even kind of nebulous is really interesting for people who are polyamorous. The themes that I hear are like, for some people, disclosure and your approach to disclosure is about managing jealousy. Like first and foremost, I think for some people, there's a tension between like transparency and autonomy, which I mentioned earlier. And that's like a matter of style sometimes. And for some people, disclosure is really like, it's a kink or it's an experience of compersion. The idea that like you feel good when your partner feels good.
Yeah.
What other things might there be in how you determine your style for disclosure for yourself and then with partners?
I mean, I think that's a good list. I do want to say about the jealousy part, like I think there are different styles, but there are maybe bad tropes around bad instincts, especially when you're starting out. Like, I think anybody who is like starting out and is feeling like, I really want my partner to tell me everything that's happening in their, relationships with others or dates with others, like maybe like in kind of real time, I want like a bunch of check-ins, like that level of kind of like freaking out when your partner is with somebody else, is not that's like a thing that you kind of have to figure out how to transcend. And I don't think the way to transcend it is barraging yourself with all the information. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's a style. I think that's a mistake or like a challenge or like a phase that you need to kind of like work through.
It's like fear. It's a fear response is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because you just think the more information you have, the more you can kind of see what might be dangerous.
Yeah. But that more information is not necessarily going to make you feel good.
Yeah. I think that's something that I see with couples that I work with who are new to non-monogamy, is that instinct.
Because where you're trying to get is like some level of trust. And if you don't have it, demanding a lot of information or like, you know, exposing yourself to a lot of information is maybe on a long timeline going to help build that trust. But I think there's other less painful ways to probably get there by leaning into some of the trust on the front end.
And maybe also some of the discomfort, you know, a little bit non-monogamy. I mean, this is true more broadly that we all have to figure out how to live in our own minds. And I think like non-monogamy can really like point that out in an uncomfortable way where it's like, I actually, you know, and this is why it like helps to dismantle enmeshment. Like, I actually have to learn how to deal with the not knowing, deal with the not being a part of something, deal with like this not being about me. And I have to know how to talk to myself about that. And my partner, and I think like when you're going from monogamy to non-monogamy, the expectation in a lot of monogamous dynamics is that your partner is making you feel better. Right.
And
like
it's their job.
It's their job to do that. And it gets really confusing once it's your partner's job to make you feel better about what is happening in their other relationships or in their sexuality or in their sexual expression.
Yeah.
So,
and you would say the problem there is enmeshment. Like, what does that mean?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, this is such a personally a tough subject for me. So I'm a little bit not being a therapist when I talk about this, and I'm a little more being myself. I am myself as a therapist too, but you know, so much of what is appealing about love and attachment is the idea that you won't be left alone with your own mind, that you won't be left alone with your own feelings, that there's someone who will like hold them with you, carry some of it with you, love you despite it being uncomfortable and challenging. Like, that's the whole reason, right? And for me personally, and that's like what I crave all the time in my relationships. And for me personally, like, it can very easily tip into this space where I'm like outsourcing that to the person, you know? I'm like, oh, what a relief. There's someone else who cares about this fucking bullshit in my head. And I don't have to do it alone. And now I'm like over reliant on them to help me feel better, to help me feel less scared, to navigate like when I'm overwhelmed in my own mind, nervous system. So there's nuance there. And I think when we talk about codependence or we talk about enmeshment, I don't like to think about it as like a state of a relationship. I like to think about it as like, it's kind of a tool for understanding when it feels like things have gotten out of balance in that department. And when you're like overly emotionally reliant, especially on one person in a way that makes you feel less stable.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And then it's gonna be really accessible to be afraid of losing that person.
Yes.
And having, you know, them having other relationships and you having information about those.
And then like, so all of that like starts feeding itself and you're kind of like going down, there's like a whirlpool that you're going down. It's like the spirals are getting kind of tighter.
Right. Yeah. And that might be, I think that kind of maps to the sort of transparency versus autonomy binary too. Like, that's probably a healthy way to think about the kind of like two poles, right? On the one hand, you should be independent and like autonomous and able to like go out and do other things with other people. And for your partners to like respect that exists, like kind of outside of them being centered. Yeah. When what are the ways that you're responsible to me, and then more importantly, the ways that you're not responsible to me when you go out, on a date with somebody else or whatever, do anything else in your life. And then on the other end of the spectrum is like being honest and transparent
and not hiding.
But God, there's really like a tension there, and it doesn't seem like there's like a right answer. I'm trying to think about like why the transparency piece would be sort of like fundamentally objectively important. Like there are certain things like you can be autonomous, but you need to be transparent around like what you're doing with other people for like the reasons of like STI safety. Right. That's a common one that comes up. Are there other ones like beyond like kind of like emotional safety? I mean, there's like scheduling, logistics and shit like that, which is, I think, a thing that comes up for people sometimes, like just like not being transparent about like, if you didn't know that I was dating a person and then I was trying to find time to go and date that person, if I wasn't transparent about it, then, that's going to create issues for us. It's not like I can just be so autonomous that my autonomy disrupts the like functioning of our lives,
right? Or
the functioning of our like finances. If we have shared finances, that requires transparency. Like I'm going to stay in a hotel, or I'm going to like go to an expensive concert or whatever. Like I need to be transparent about that with you so that you know how much money we're going to have.
Yeah. I think it's very complicated. And I find myself probably on a regular basis, like moving back and forth between those two poles and asking myself, like, is this autonomy or am I hiding? Is this transparency or am I anxious? Like
you worry about being overly transparent because you're trying to talk about your anxiety that you feel in the other relationship.
Yeah. Or even like demanding or wanting information from other people. Right. Is that like an expression of my anxiety?
Yeah.
There may also be...
Good question.
Okay, all good questions. We'll leave them unanswered for now. What about the compersion piece or like kink? I mean, what do you all feel about that element of disclosure, especially around sex or like love or experiences that partners are having with other people that are positive?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there too, because like on the one hand, the idea of compersion, like the idea that you feel good because your partner's feeling good. So if you come back from a date and are like, I had amazing sex with this person who I really connected with on all these levels, like I should, the idea that I would like conjure like a great feeling about that because you had a great feeling. Which sounds nice.
That's great.
Good for you.
And I think is available to some people, but I think it's a high expectation.
Yeah, my stomach literally just dropped. Like,
and then very adjacent to that is like the kink, like kind of like cuck thing, which is, the whole reason that's a thing is because of the fear, I think. Like, I don't know a ton about this, but like, I read a book that like centered it a lot in the narrative. And like, my understanding is that like a lot of what people get off on about like being cucked, like knowing great detail, like knowing great detail about their partner having sex with other people or even like witnessing it or something like that, is the idea that they're being sort of like subject to the worst humiliation.
Right. It's a direct address to the taboo of being humiliated by having a partner sleep with someone else and enjoy it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that can feel good, I guess, in a kinky way. So that's a lot.
I mean, it was interesting. I finally read More by Molly Rodden Winter, the famous memoir about non-monogamy. And this was a big element in her marriage with her husband. Like for her husband, one of the main reasons that he wanted to be open was because he thought her sleeping with other people was sexy. And so he always wanted to hear about everything when she came home. And I think for her, it felt like she didn't want to, she was like, well, this is like special. It's just for me,
right?
And so it felt maybe like an invasion of her autonomy, or what she was kind of getting out of the experience. So, which I think lines up with what we've been sort of like feeling around in here. And I guess the question is, what do you do when there is kind of like a mismatch with that. Like neither of them are wrong, really.
No.
You know? I mean, of course, it's feelings. Feelings aren't right or wrong. But that's complicated. You know? How can they both get what they want out of that?
Right.
Their relationship.
And especially if there is a safety element for people. I think that's complicated.
And then there's the whole, you know, triangle element too. Like we're just talking about this in like a bilateral way, like kind of ignoring the feelings of the, you know, third or fourth parties involved too. So like that tension between transparency and autonomy, like how transparent I am with you about my relationship with this person over here. Like in some ways that's between you and me, but isn't it between me and them as well? Like I might have another partner who is like, I don't want you to tell Sarah everything about our relationship.
You know what's so funny about that I'm just realizing right now? I have absolutely no problem with people talking about having sex with me or the details of having sex with me because I just love for people to be talking about me.
Interesting.
I was like, just so everyone knows, I want to be super clear about this.
Talk about Sarah having sex with me.
Yes, please.
How would you feel about me talking to another partner about like our sex life?
I don't think it would bother me.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess me either, but what if it wasn't going to be flattering, you know?
Well, that's
It doesn't bother me because
obviously
I'm
not
like,
the case.
obviously amazing.
Let's imagine that.
I mean, and
There's some polite minimizing going on over there.
magical thinking, right? I mean, partly it is the magical thinking that I just get to imagine that people are, partly I'm like, people only talk about people that they're interested in. And I just want people to be interested in me. So whether it's good or bad, I'd prefer for it to be good, but.
By magical thinking, though, you mean like that you can allow yourself to imagine the best possible version of the information that is like circulating.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of fundamental to this whole conversation, right? Like we're kind of making the argument that rather than having all of the most, like the fullest disclosure of the most like sort of honest and true everything, like being a little bit vague, allowing ourselves to imagine the best version of it.
Yeah.
But
or
you
the
can also-
one that like, yes, feels best to us. Or that we can most easily live with.
Which I like agree with, and I think that is what we're doing, and I think it works well. It would also be possible for somebody to be imagining the worst version, though. And like be really hung up on that, and it be like kind of torturous.
Yeah. From the perspective of someone talking about you.
Yeah, or from the perspective of
The worst case scenario for me is that I'm no longer in their minds. Not that I am too much in their minds in an uncontrollable way.
Sarah, who? But I mean, yeah. I feel like all of this points to like there's where it's all so individual and personal to like how we perceive this stuff, right?
I mean, you can see why people fight about this.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
it's like what you start talking about, like what is the nature of truth? You know, like
it's
you
true.
could be like,
Yes.
you're lying to me. You're not telling me the truth.
Yes.
And like,
Right.
I mean, we've had that fight
Yes.
before, right?
Yes.
Where we're
It's
fighting
incredibly
over
subjective.
like, did you hide something for me? Did you not tell me something? And it's like, you know, sometimes it's like an emotional thing, right? We got in a huge fight about like the first time that I said, I love you to another partner. And like, I didn't tell you about it right when it happened. And then I told you about it a few weeks later. And I think we did a whole podcast episode about it.
Which
Right?
it's crazy to think about how much that doesn't bother me now. You know?
Yeah. Maybe you just don't care about me anymore.
But at the time, right,
was
it
huge.
felt like an
Yeah.
existential threat to
Right.
your
And
relationship.
then it was like, did I have the feeling and not tell you about the feeling? And you had to like pin the feeling to an actual, like saying
Right.
the actual words, but like, you know, that's a concrete thing, but there's also all the like squidgy things about like, and I think part of the content of that fight was also like me not sharing how the relationship had, or you're perceiving me not sharing how the relationship had changed
Yeah.
for me and had become more important.
Yeah.
Like, were we not doing this thing of falling in love with people or whatever?
I was so jealous of that relationship. And I mean, for all kinds of reasons, but the scope of my jealousy, it's like I can just feel jealous about so much.
It knows no bounds.
It knows no bounds. I really, it's colorful and constant. But one of the flavors was that you were able to develop a more emotionally serious relationship and to fall in love. And that felt so unavailable to me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But then that was kind of happening to you at the same time. Right?
Well, I made it happen.
You're like, well, I love you too.
I mean, talk about minimizing. That's like an unkind thing to say. But I just remember that was a feeling, definitely. And that's an example of disclosure that has changed for us. So after that, we were like, oh, I think we want to like be informed when a relationship has turned into like an I love you relationship. And then within the past year, you and I both checked in about it and we're like, I don't think I need to know that detail. Like, I think we will start talking about partners as like it being like a loving partnership, but I don't need to know like what you're saying to people and when.
Right. Because then you're starting to like audit the specifics of like conversations and like language that you're using and stuff like that. I mean, that is probably impinging on autonomy to some extent.
Yeah. And I think for me, like, also, there is something about just, I don't know if the word is respect between the two of us and between me and my partners too, that it's like, I want to be able to hold this without being overburdening you with like the very details of like every emotional arc that I'm experiencing while also being honest.
In reference to your relationships or mine? Or both?
Like kind of both, in both directions. Like I want that to be, I think in my highest self, I want you to receive that as an example of like how much I love you and trust you. And that we can actually hold all of this without it being distractingly scary or threatening. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's a piece there that's like being able to kind of take responsibility for one's own jealousy and like I really appreciate the way that sometimes you're like, you're just like, I feel jealous about this thing or about this person. Will you help me feel less jealous about it?
Oh, yeah. And you're like, what can I do? And I'm like, say this exact thing.
Yeah. Which is, I think, like maybe specific to you. I don't know if other people are doing that. But it is like admirable and like responsible to be able to be like, I feel this way about this thing. And it's not necessarily that big of a deal. I just need you to care for it. You know, in some, you know, specific or general way.
Yeah.
And which is like so much better than being like protective of one's own jealousy or kind of like trying to pretend like it's not there and like it's all because of something the other person is doing.
Right. Or to deny it because it's embarrassing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I may be a bit of a over discloser in that department now, I'm realizing. That I'm just like, this is making me feel this way. I feel jealous. Here's a little, you know.
No, I think it's great.
Okay.
I'm going to sneeze. Let's take a break.
Okay. So you both said that I was not allowed to come in after the break, talking about the very nature of truth.
Wait, is that true?
This must be the topic of the episode. The nature of truth.
The nature of truth. But I do think that we are talking about like what is honesty and what is like fidelity, and how that can be so. It's scary to think about how different that can be for different people, and that it's like not something we can really hold in our hands. And I think like monogamy, as we've discussed in other episodes, monogamy holds this promise or offers this promise that you can know what is fidelity and loyalty, and when it's broken. But in fact,
right. Like we have an agreement about that together. what is our truth, and like there's nobody, it's like such a tight unit that nobody else can come in and like disrupt that.
Right.
But you're saying in fact that doesn't work.
Well, and I'm saying that we've discussed on this podcast how even in the closed system of monogamy that Jessica was describing, there are issues of disclosure. Like, we know that people in monogamous relationships can feel like they've been betrayed because somebody was like looking at, hot girls on Instagram.
Right.
So I think that is a specter that is always looming in relationships, but I think that it gets pointed out in a more kind of complex way when you're having multiple intimate relationships at once. In part because there has to be a little bit more spoken about this.
Yeah.
And so you have to actually like come to terms with like, what do I want to know? What don't I want to know? What do my other partners want to know or not want to know, and why?
Like if I'm just looking at hot girls on Instagram, there's no reason for you to know that.
You've never done that,
tell
right?
you that. No, absolutely not. It's all like political memes and stuff like that. It's all heady philosophical content about the nature of truth.
You've been looking at heady philosophical content without me?
I'm sorry, Sarah. I'll send them all to you. Everything that I look at on Instagram, I will send to you from now on. But once there's another, you can't have that level of like sort of like privacy or autonomy when you're in multiple relationships, because between them you need to be in some sort of communication about like what's going on over here with this person versus what's going on over there. And I suppose like a bunch of like solo poly people who we like to just completely ignore on this podcast. Sorry.
No, we did that one episode.
That it might be a little bit less like present for them, right? If I'm going out, if I live by myself and I'm going out on 2 dates a week, do the people that I'm going out on the dates with need to know very much about each other? What do you think?
I mean, I definitely have dated some solo poly people, and so have you.
Yeah.
In my experience with dating solo poly people, and it might be a style thing, they tend to tell me, I think they're telling me.
Right.
It's hard to imagine that they're telling me as much as they are, and there's also more.
Right. Yeah.
I guess that's always possible.
What I'm asking though is like, do they need to be like, is the transparency important? Like we've called out like the reason it could be important for like safer sex reasons.
Right.
It could be important for like scheduling reasons, but and then at some point maybe it becomes important for emotional reasons, but like, or maybe it always is. And maybe that kind of disclosure is important because if you and I are in a relationship and then I'm in a relationship over here, like those relationships are always going to implicate each other.
That's the thing is, it's
right?
like, it is a system.
Yeah.
And
it's a system.
It's a system, and you can't silo
It's still a closed system.
anything or anyone off in that way.
So you mentioned something that you'd mentioned before about people sharing, like how much people share with you, and like kind of this other reason I think that you were talking about, like that specifically male partners share a lot of information with you that you feel like is beyond what is necessary. And like,
well, I think what I was getting at is I think people in general tend to share a lot with me about their sex lives.
okay. Yeah.
I'm also a therapist.
Right. Some of them pay you and some of them don't.
Yeah. And I experience it differently according to gender. That's what I was kind of getting at, is that with male partners, it feels a little more fraught when they're telling me the details of their sex lives. And to be clear, with any partners, I do want to know if they're dating people. I probably want to know even if they just went on a date. I don't know.
I like how you're always making public service announcements to people that you might date in the future. Like, let me state now that I want to know this information.
Take this down, everyone.
Listen to this
I know that's why people are listening to this podcast, right?
Yeah.
Just take notes on that. Well, I think it's because it's clarifying for me in the moment, right?
Okay.
That I do want to know that stuff. When my partners tell me about the specifics of the sex that they've had, and when this came up in another episode too, with men, I will feel jealous. Like it's
a male partner.
Yeah, if it's a male partner, it's very accessible to me to like compare myself and to get like spun out on it a little bit.
you thinking about a man that you're dating having sex with another woman or other women will spin you out. That's what
It can.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely available.
Samesies flipping the gender things for me.
With like women and non-binary folks, the experience is different. And I think that gives me pause because also I have had like partners who are not men who told me about the details of their sex lives, and it was not as activating for me.
Even if you're dating a woman and that woman is telling you about having sex with another woman, that's like you're in the place, the comparative place.
I think it's still less activating. Yeah.
That's interesting.
I know. I don't love it when I come to these conclusions or like find myself in this territory, which I feel like I find myself in a lot on this podcast.
Even if your female partner was like, and then I went out with this woman and like she went down on me and it was so amazing and I came like 15 times. You're just like,
I have not had that exact experience, but I'm trying to inhabit it in the hypothetical. I think that it could bother me. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It could bother me. It's just like there's not the sharp, immediate availability for like comparison and fear that exists for me with men.
I'm digging into it in part because I don't have the equivalent experience. I haven't dated enough men to like really know. So it's interesting.
And I mean, there's kind of a lot there in that being the case, but I wanted to mention it because it just surfaced for me as we were talking about it and seemed relevant.
Yeah. And I think that, yes, it definitely like resonates with me too. The idea that your experiences with other men or like my female partner's experiences with other men, I'm more likely to compare myself.
Yeah.
You know, I can just like fit myself into that role. And I guess, but maybe we're saying there's also like a man-woman gender tension that is
for me. Yeah. I wouldn't say, I'm sure that's not universal. But it is worth saying that I can be very sensitive to like women I'm dating in particular over disclosing about the emotional dynamics of their relationships with men. So that is just like of note a little bit that, it's not like I don't experience jealousy with women. I do. It just, there's a slightly different flavor.
Yeah. It sounds like it's always when there's a man involved.
Yeah, it's pretty much the men are the problem.
Yeah.
Very much. It always comes back to like some sharp, really difficult, like hard feelings that I wish I didn't have. Basically.
Right. And then we'd also talked about like the idea that sometimes men want to share things with women, with their female partners as a way of like seeking some sort of like absolution or something like that.
Well, I think there can be the fear of cheating a little bit. I think also there is sometimes like men wanting women to sort of like hold things that they might feel some guilt or shame or ambiguity about. I mean, I think that that's a dynamic that exists between men and women.
Yeah.
That in this kind of puritanical sense, women are like the arbiters of morality in sex in particular. And I can sometimes feel that.
Yeah.
That weight.
Yeah. That's definitely a mistake that I've made in relationships, like doing that, wanting like over disclosing things to female partners where we had sort of established that like we were all cool to talk about whatever. And then I think sometimes like I pushed that too far and then got the sense that like, oh, it wasn't that cool. And I was like too cavalier and not, I wasn't as careful about the other person's feelings as I should have been.
Yeah.
And you're right that now that you put it in those terms, like it was probably for that reason, that like the idea that if I feel shame about this thing, you know, especially about like a sexual relationship with a woman or sex that I'm having with a woman, another woman hearing about that and witnessing it like absolves me of that shame in some way.
Yeah. I think that exists.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I don't know how I feel about being positioned that way. I also wanted to say that this is culturally, it's like a very religious idea.
Yeah.
And I mentioned a couple of times when we were leading into this podcast that having gone to Catholic school in during puberty. And I got to go to confession. It wasn't like a totally regular, but it was a semi-regular thing. And people who were not Catholic or confirmed, there weren't actually that many of us, were allowed to opt into confession if we wanted. And I was like, absolutely, yes, please. Can I go to other people's confession too? Like if they don't go to theirs, can I go to theirs? Because there is something really compelling about the idea that these things that are knocking around in your brain and you're like, is this bad? Am I bad? Is this bad? Am I bad? You could literally just name them off to someone with some authority and they could be like, you are very bad. But because you've told me about this and you've come clean, you like are back in a state of grace, essentially.
Yeah.
So I just like had to bring that up because the parallel is very strong for me. And I remember what that felt like as a young teenager and how enticing it was. So I think like this concept exists on all these different levels.
Shame and absolution and disclosure, like sharing leading to that.
And getting
absolution.
Like back to a state of grace and then transgressing again, you know.
This is like a real Thanksgiving episode, like the Pilgrims. That's where we got all this from.
Thanks, guys.
Cute, like their little buckles and their shame.
Just buckles and shame.
Buckles and shame
all the way down. And violence.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think all of this, of course, just keeps circling back to this idea that there isn't like a place to arrive here. There's just like a lot of threads to pull on. And I think we're all really like influenced by our experiences with like honesty, fidelity, transparency, goodness, badness, disclosure. But we don't really talk about it. And it will like kind of manifest in these ways where, you know, as we're sitting here, like, why am I like this? Why am I like this? Why do I feel this way?
Yeah. So what do you feel like the advice would be for people trying to navigate how much to disclose?
I guess based on this conversation, I'm realizing that it's dynamic. And so like having some grace for yourself and other people in the process of understanding what you like and what you don't and why is pretty important. And that there isn't actually a right way or a wrong way to do this. And so, you know, to your point, Jessica, if people have different styles, the idea that you would pathologize one style versus the other is not true or fair.
Yeah. And then also that some of those like pathologies are sort of like internalized cultural things that maybe we're trying to transcend or transmute, but that are difficult to shed.
Yeah. Right. And we all value our autonomy and privacy and also want to feel close to the people that we are vulnerable and intimate with and are afraid of being betrayed and want to know how to express loyalty.
And feel safe.
And feel safe.
Right. And some of that, what the real conversation is a lot of the time is probably like, tell me that I'm safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
You're safe.
Thanks, Alex. You too.
What about me?
Jessica, you're fucked.
No, you're very safe.
You're very safe. What about, did we want to reflect on any other mistakes we felt like we'd made here before we close out?
Thinking about how we're not out there like making podcasts with other people, you know.
That's
or
true.
Like auditioning new best friend, life partner, co-podcast producers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How could you even think of that?
If I go on
It didn't occur to me until just now.
meet up with another podcast producer, you want to know about it? Like, should I text you about it on the drive home? Okay.
You should just put the whole thing on speakerphone, please.
Or just be like, God, their podcast sucks so much. Their mic setup, weak.
So yeah, anything else that you want to mention about mistakes? I feel like you kind of called me out on, you're like, what are the conclusions here? And, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
What are yours?
I mentioned the one of like oversharing in the interest of absolution in a way that is like insensitive. And I've probably made that one a lot of times, like a lot of times with other people. And then with you, I've probably been more like hiding and letting you hold the insecurity by not being transparent enough, or, not telling the truth about what's going on in other relationships. And like that, just like being party to that tension of like, you're going to be afraid of this thing that's happening, so don't tell you about the thing.
Yeah.
And then that makes the fear worse.
Yeah.
So no big deal. Just that one.
Just that one little mistake. Yeah. But it's hard. And I think, like, in conclusion, this is like pretty challenging stuff, and like finding a working equilibrium takes a lot of, I think, vulnerability and willingness to kind of like go pretty deep on some uncomfortable stuff.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
All right.
Okay.
Take us out. I feel like we've got to let Alex go take it out. This poor guy.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for listening to Mistakes Were Made. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends about it. Tell your poly friends. Tell your monogamous friends. Tell your mom.
Your mom will love it.
Your mom will love it.
Yeah,
Don't tell
she
my
will.
mom.
Actually, your mom already listens to it. She told me she loves it.
And also subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I noticed that when I looked at our stats the other day that a lot of people are listening on Windows Media Player. And I just want to say y'all are really cool.
Old school.
Yeah, old school. I hope there's like a visualization of that.
Ooh, yeah.
Remember those cool Windows Media Player visualizations?
That were kind of like moving
Just the,
shapes.
like,
Yeah. It's just like super trippy. And follow us on Instagram at MistakesCast.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.